Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP Podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This week, Tim Baker and I tackle an important and often overlooked part of the financial plan, and that's the estate plan. We get it. It's not fun to think about end-of-life preparations, so we keep this one short and sweet, covering what documents you need in place, why it's important to check your beneficiaries, and why you should create a legacy folder if you don't already have one. At YFP Planning, our team of certified financial planners is ready to help you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. And yes, financial freedom includes ensuring you have your estate plan buttoned up. If you're interested in joining more than 280 households in 40 plus states that work with YFP Planning for one-on-one financial planning and wealth management, you can book a free discovery call at yfpplanning.com. Whether you're just getting started in the middle of your career or nearing retirement, our team is ready to help. Whether or not YFP Planning's financial planning services are a good fit for you, know that we appreciate your support of this podcast and our mission to help pharmacists achieve financial freedom. All right, let's hear from today's sponsor, the American Pharmacists Association, and then we'll jump into my interview with YFP co-founder and director of financial planning, Tim Baker. Today's episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast is brought to you by the American Pharmacists Association. APHA has partnered with Your Financial Pharmacist to deliver personalized financial education benefits for APHA members. Throughout the year, APHA will be hosting a number of exclusive webinars covering topics like student loan debt payoff strategies, home buying, investing, insurance needs, and much more. Join APHA now to gain premier access to these educational resources and to receive discounts on YFP products and services. You can join APHA at a 25% discount by visiting pharmacist.com/join and using the coupon code YFP. Again, that's pharmacist.com/join and using the coupon code YFP. Tim Baker, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, good to be here, Tim. How's it going?
It is going. I'm excited for today's discussion, which we're going to keep somewhat brief, knowing that the talk around end-of-life planning is admittedly not the most exciting or uplifting topic. And we're going to be talking about exactly that, dusting off the estate plan, making sure we take a minute to take stock of where we are at with these important documents. And Tim, perhaps we have some people that are listening where it's a chance to revisit the work that they've already done and to make sure those documents are up to date. Whereas for others, it's maybe just a point to get started. So we're going to cover some of the basics. Obviously, this is not legal advice. We're not attorneys, but certainly an important part of the financial plan. So Tim Baker, I think building off of what I just said, I would expect that there's some gaps here as it relates to estate planning for some that, again, similar to insurance, not a really fun topic to think about, let alone execute on. But the data really is eye-opening in terms of just how big of a gap this is for many when it comes to their financial plan. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, there's a stat out there, Karen.com, 2023 Wills and Estate Planning Study that said 2 out of 3 Americans do not have any type of estate planning document. And I would say that with our work with clients, it's probably more dire than that. I would say that 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 clients don't have any type of documents in place. Now, typically the further along you are in life, in your career, the more, dependence that you have or things that, major life changes, the more that might, force you to take stock, pause a little bit and say, hey, is this important? But it is one of the major overlooked components of a financial plan. And it's important for anyone to have an estate plan, but I think it's more important same thing with life insurance, Tim, if you have a house, a spouse, and mouths to feed. Now, those are typically the things that trigger people to start thinking about this. But on the other side of the coin, as you're retiring and moving into that stage of your life, it's important to make sure that it's there and, you have updated information. You might start thinking more about legacy and charitable things that you need to sprinkle into your financial plan, your estate plan that, is warranted to kind of dust it off a bit. But yeah, it's just one of those things that a lot of people have a blind spot for because we don't like to think about our death or our income or the being incapacitated essentially, which is what the estate plan, tries to solve.
Tim, when I present on this topic, I always, put a disclaimer out there that, hey, this is not, as we're talking about here, the most exciting part of the financial plan for obvious reasons. And the timing of this is really good. I'm actually in the middle of this section of the plan with our lead planner from YFP Planning, Kelly Reddy Hefner. And, I've got some outstanding tasks dragging my feet on to go back and review some of these documents that we established several years ago, update the legacy folder. We'll talk about that here in today's session. And unlike other parts, when we came off the section on looking at investments and updating our nest egg, it's like, I'm all in. Let's do those calculations. Let's get the work doing, right? That's fun. That's exciting. We're planning and thinking about the future. This, not so much. And I think the data, certainly shines a light on that. But as we're going to talk about here today, such an important and often overlooked part of the financial plan that we want to make sure that as we're building other parts of the plan, that we're playing a little bit of defense with the protection part as well. So, Tim, what exactly is an estate plan before we get too far into the episode?
So a lot of people, when they hear estate, they think real estate, Tim, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that. I mean, your real estate could be part of your estate plan, but the estate plan is essentially the process of arranging in life the management, disposal of your assets and property at death, or even at incapacity. So it's really important. And for a lot of people, it's people that really value this type of work have either been burned by it themselves or have a family member who've been burned by it. But you really want to, direct attention to this. It's also a plan for health and property in the event that you are capacity, like I mentioned. So if you are unable to pay your bills, if you are unable to care for a child, like what happens? And unfortunately, if you don't have an estate plan in place, the state in which you live in writes one for you in, what's called the probate process. And oftentimes, more often than not, you don't want the state, you don't want the government to basically say, hey, this is what happens to your property. This is what happens to your kids. You might have charitable intentions in your brain that are, if they're not written down in a will or something like that, it's not going to happen. So, if these are things that are important to you, which I think for most humans, making sure, I know who's going to take care of my kids, we want to make sure that, we're working with an estate attorney to do so.
Next question I have for you, Tim, in terms of, who needs one? As folks are listening, you mentioned, this previously, you talked about the house, the spouse, the mouth to feed, but generally speaking, as our listeners hear this discussion, who really needs to have this front and center as part of the plan?
Yeah. And I think if you're not in that, that population of people, if I'm a single person and maybe, I'm rented or whatever, it doesn't mean that you don't need an estate plan. If you want to make sure that you are directing medical decisions and things like that, you need an estate plan and you need to go through that. So, we put the emphasis on this because, again, at the end of the day, we don't want the dependents that are there, if you leave us, to not have a proper plan. But that doesn't necessarily diminish, any type of healthcare or planning need if you're single and you don't have dependents or things like that. So I would say everyone should have an estate plan. And, I think working with an attorney, I think, is best in class. Obviously, attorneys cost money. There are a lot of solutions out there that are kind of more DIY forms and things like that, which kind of are a little bit cringe for me. But yeah, if you're in that, if you're in the population of you're a human and you have a heartbeat, it's just one thing you should at least consider and go down the path to evaluate if it's for you.
And when we think about what we're trying to address with the specific parts of the estate plan, which we'll get to here in a moment, I think a peace of mind, this is something that, wherever you are in terms of the different phases and areas of life, knowing that you've shored up this part of the plan. So I would suspect that is one big part of the objectives of the estate plan. What else would you consider here?
Yeah, it's peace of mind, giving a plan for your family to, for them to execute in terms of like how you want to be cared for, how you want property to be handled, all of that stuff. I think it is really an exercise in efficient transfer of assets. So what we're really trying to do is minimize cost. So that could be things like, taxes, probate, all the documents, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that your stuff goes to the right person. So you hear horror stories of like, the life insurance policy goes to an ex instead of like a current spouse, health, all that kind of stuff is kind of on the table. So, So those are the objectives. Create a plan so that in the event, Tim, that you're not here, that you have a quarterback for someone that can make sure that property healthcare decisions are taken care of. It doesn't have to be the same person. These are typically through power of attorneys, that the kids are taken care of. Could be that you have a testamentary trust that's set up in the event that you and Jess are no longer here. So then the trust would be created for the benefit of the boys. All of that stuff. It could be, part of the estate plan could be directions that you give directly to your doctor. That's called a live-in will, that says, hey, if I don't want to breathe in tube, or don't want to feed in tube, those type of things. And every state's going to be different. So there's lots of stuff to cover, but the objective, I think, at the end of the day, I would put at the top of the list is peace of mind. Peace of mind for you, peace of mind for the family. The costs and all that kind of stuff is important too, especially if you're looking at larger estates. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's a peace of mind, and in making sure that your loved ones are cared for in the way that is in line with your wishes.
This is one of those areas too, Tim, where I see there can be momentum that comes from not only having this complete, but also having the clarity and the peace of mind of the documents in place. It reminds me of some of the discussions we've had around, whether it's doing a nest egg calculation as we plan for retirement, whether it's figuring out how we're going to tackle, the student loans. Sometimes those numbers won't change dramatically in the short term, but if we can have some of the peace of mind and the clarity around knowing that we've done some of the calculations, the evaluation, we've considered different factors, and now we have a plan that we're working towards, that momentum can be really powerful as we look at the financial plan at large. And I think the same thing here, that, this is one of those looming things of like, I know I should do it, don't really want to do it. There's a lot to consider here. It's overwhelming. It's confusing. It's not fun to think about. But once we can see through this, and again, not something that we just complete and put up on the shelf, we want to revisit this as well. Really, I think gives us a space to be able to move forward with other parts of the plan as well.
Yeah, I feel like once this gets checked off, it's a little bit of like, all right, like we have more capacity to, look at other things and be excited about some other things, knowing that this is, taken care of. Again, it's not necessarily that we just throw it on the shelf and we never look at it, but for a lot of people, just to kind of get over that hump and having those documents in place is a big kind of boulder to kind of roll up the hill. So yeah, super important to get it in there. And then, our job as planners is to dust it off every once in a while and say, hey, what does this look like? Are there changes that need to be made, et cetera?
So in terms of action items, let's talk about 3 areas that folks can think about. One would be getting the documents in place, and we'll do a quick mention of what those documents are. Again, the work to be done there really with an estate planning attorney, ideally in collaboration with your financial planner. The second would be considerations around the beneficiaries. And then the third, we'll talk about the legacy folder. So Tim, as we move into action items here, number 1, get your documents in place. At a high level, what are the documents that folks should be considering?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the estate checklist that Shay and I have in our financial planning portal, so I can just go through these. So, imagine a list on the left, and then my name and Shay's name, on the top of the column. So, these are things like a will. So, essentially, once you pass away, the court in probate will read your will, and then if it's a valid will, they'll basically execute to that. So, do you have a will in place? Power of attorney. So, really, 2 types of power of attorney. There could be one for property. So, basically someone that's going to, take control of your bank account, your credit cards, your investment accounts, either in the event that you're incapacitated or at your death, and figure out, work with the courts to dispose of those, or, move those to the beneficiaries in an orderly fashion. It could be a live-in will. So a live-in will is kind of those instructions that are, made out to the doctor. Every state has a different term of it, but, you would say, hey, do not resuscitate in these conditions. Could be a live-in trust. So a live-in trust is essentially where you are, if Shay and I had in some states this makes a lot of sense, but if Shay and I decided to set up a live-in trust, we would essentially, instead of our house being in our names, it would be in the Baker family trust, and all of those assets essentially avoid probate. So the trustee in that moment would essentially take control of the trust and any assets that are inside of it, whether it's a house, an investment account, or whatever. Trustee is, in charge of that. But it could be, if you have kids, it could be like a testamentary trust that, for the benefit of a minor. So some of those become in force, or they're created at one's death. So that would be another thing, is just there's a trust. There's lots of different flavors of trust, but that would be another one that I would ask the attorney about to see if it's in your best interest to create those. And then the last thing, if I didn't mention this already, is kind of a check on beneficiary designations. You can get into that a little bit more, but those are the main documents.
Great overview. We also talked about this with two estate planning attorneys, episode 222 of the YFP podcast. We'll link to that in the show note. Had a good conversation with Nathan and Note Song. I love the way they break down and explain these documents in a very easy to understand way. Even as you're engaging and working with an estate planning attorney, again, I think it's valuable to feel like you have some background knowledge and exactly what do these terms mean. So that's number one, get your documents in place. Tim, number two, you alluded to, which is something that, I've overlooked in days gone by, is really considering the beneficiaries, especially after you have some of these documents in place. So what are the areas that we want to consider as it relates to the beneficiaries, and why is this important?
Yeah. So again, looking at kind of Shay and I's, financial planning software here, we're looking at the beneficiary kind of rundown. So it shows all of our different accounts, from check-ins, savings, CDs, investment accounts, our life insurance, that type of thing. And it basically says, like, this is the account balance. And then, like, what's the death benefit? So, typically if it's like a cash account or investment, it's the same. For a life insurance policy, it won't have an account balance, but it'll have, unless it's permanent, but it'll have a death benefit. So, account balance column, death benefit column, and then it has a primary and a contingent beneficiary. So essentially, if I were to pass away, all of my stuff would essentially go to Shay. If we were to pass away, then all of our stuff would go to the contingent beneficiary, which might be, directly to our kids or in a trust in the name, that's created for the kids' benefit. So going through this exercise is really, really important, because again, you hear those horror stories of, like, this, my stuff didn't go to the right person. Yeah. And, that's causing additional pain and anguish to the surviving heirs. So having a checklist to go through and make sure that, the things go to the right people is really, really important. And if you haven't done that in a while, it's important to do so. And a lot of people, they don't have a beneficiary set up. So if that's the case, then that goes through probate. So if there is a beneficiary, that IRA, for example, goes right to Shay or goes right to the trust. And that is good because it avoids probate and you don't have to worry about that in court. So that's a really important thing to make sure that you're on top of.
Yeah. And I think the thing that, might get overlooked here, Tim, is, maybe someone has a spouse where, on an IRA or on a life insurance policy, whatever it may be, where before they set up some of their estate planning documents, it might be the spouse and vice versa that are listed as a beneficiary. And depending on how they set up the trust and the estate planning documents, they may need to switch some of that over time. So again, I think that it just speaks to, yes, there's a lift up front of work to be done, but as other parts of the plan evolve, this is something we want to be revisiting, every so often. We'll talk about what this looks like in relation to our planning services and how the planning team is regularly engaged in this activity. So that's number two, check your beneficiaries. Number three, Tim, again, I think such an important part of this process, especially from a peace of mind, is around this concept of a legacy folder. So creating one if you don't have one, updating one if you already have one. Tell us about what this looks like.
Yeah. So if you're all buttoned up in those other areas of the docs in place and beneficiaries, that's great. And you're ahead of a lot of people. However, if your loved ones don't know where to find everything, like the documents or passwords, like it makes their life a lot harder. So what the legacy folder is really meant to be is kind of that gathering place of all of the things that are important related to this topic. So the estate plan documents, life insurance policies, trust documents, tax returns. You could include something there like a side letter. So Tim, if I pass away, I want my ashes to be sprinkled on Lincoln Financial Field. That's not going to be in an estate plan. So things like that you want your loved ones to know about, maybe final wishes and even like passwords. Like, I can't tell you, Tim, how many we probably have 10,000 passwords each these days.
Goodness.
So
yeah,
where are those and how do your loved ones access them? And I think if you can create a legacy folder and either put it in a fireproof safe or a safety deposit box, or, some people do this electronically, and you can give that to a loved one, along with a death certificate, they're able to operate and basically manage your estate much, much easier than if they're trying to look for things and, dig through, folders and drawers and parts of the house that, they don't necessarily know where to go. So it's kind of that, hey, this is a folder, a filing system that has all of the things that are important related to this topic that your loved one knows about. Communicate to them where the stuff is really important too. And this could be important for your own stuff. This also could be important for if you are the executor or the person for, say, a parent. So it's important to have your house in order, but I think it's also important that if you are, the person that might be taking care of elderly parents, that kind of what the plan is for them as well.
Yeah, and have a copy, of those documents as well on hand. This reminds me, Tim, one of the things you've said before on the podcast is for you, I think when the clocks change, you use that as a signal to pull your credit, right? Do a check on your credit report.
That's right.
I think a similar rhythm here, like whatever that is, especially with how quick information can change, whether it's passwords, whether it's new accounts, new documents, transfers of accounts, like making sure that you're looking at this on the regular. And I love what you said, right? That we can do such a great job in getting all these documents together, but, do others and our loved ones know where these are at in the event that, something would happen that this is needed? This reminds me much, Tim, of a great conversation I had way back when with Michelle Cooper, who wrote a book on this topic of her journey as a widow to love, happiness, financial independence, navigating some of the challenges that can come when you lose a loved one, not only obviously emotionally what's happening in that moment, but also then, being able to navigate through that difficult time, especially if you're in a situation where maybe, one of the people in a household taking a more active role in finances, making sure that all parties have a good understanding of what's going on and where those documents are located. And this is an area, Tim, where I get a lot of peace knowing that, hey, if my financial planning team has access to these documents or knows where this information is, as well as, parents, in-laws, whomever is going to be an integral part of the execution, that also helps in understanding that there's more than one party that's going to be involved to be able to sort this out and to be able to work through this.
Yeah. And, again, if you put yourself in, maybe in the state of like a grieving spouse, and you're working with a planner that has visibility on this type of things, like the life insurance companies or whoever you're dealing with, they're not coming out of the woodwork to pay a claim. So, I would be like, hey, what about, this? Like, again, not to be morbid, but I would say, to Jess, hey, what about, this life insurance policy or this that, she might not be thinking of because that's not where her brain is. I was talking to a loved one recently, and I think it was something like some type of insurance policy. And, he was the executor for another family member. And he was like trying to find this document. He got lucky. Like he found like the policy that he was able to put in a claim, but they're not like, if something happens, they're not like banging down the door for them to pay you money. So, if you have everything in order here, it just makes life a lot easier.
Yeah.
And from a financial perspective, it makes things a lot easier to get the support that you need for the heirs, for the dependents that are kind of left behind.
Tim, do you see for folks that choose to do the legacy folder electronically, I would assume there's still somewhat of a hybrid approach, right? I'm thinking about things like Social Security cards, birth certificates, other things that they might want to have physically, of course, a physical document in a fire safe proof, whereas, other things they want to house electronically that makes it for easier updating. So probably I'm curious from your perspective, or either how you and Shay do it, do you see folks doing more, hey, everything is hard copy in a safe, or try to do as much electronic, a hybrid? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some services out there that are trying to do like an electronic offering. For us, it's kind of like it's both. I'm a big Google user, so like we have a folder that has essentially everything in it. We use a password vault. There's kind of a document that has instructions related to that.
Yep.
But then there are some things that the way that I do it's kind of see hard copy, and then there's a spot that because I'm not like, for me, to go back and scan some of these things or like policies, like I don't, ain't nobody got time for that, Tim. So, it's kind of a hybrid approach.
Yeah.
And, I think the ease of use of being able to share, some folders electronically using something like Google, along with some of the paper stuff is kind of how we've kind of pieced it together, so to speak. Yeah.
Tim, as we wrap up, I want to talk about how we functionally execute on the estate planning part of the financial plan as it relates to the financial planning services that our team offers at YFP Planning. I would say it's rare that someone comes up into the door interested in our services and saying, can't wait to work with you guys. We're going to work on the estate planning part of the insurance part of the plan. Usually it's, hey, we're focused on saving or investing for the future, retirement planning, perhaps those folks earlier in the journey, student loans, home buying, growing family, et cetera. But this is one, regardless, that we've got to make sure that we're looking at, whether it's the first thing on the list or not. What does this look like in terms of the planning team and the service we offer and how we execute on this?
Yeah. So the way that we do this, the way that we kind of tackle the plan, and then, this part of the plan is we have the first part of our engagement with clients we call the first five. Mm-hmm. So the first five is really designed to go through the critical pieces of a financial plan. So the first one being get organized. So this is where we are going to do a deep dive into your client portal. We're going to look at, your checking, your savings, your investment accounts, your house, your mortgage, your student loans, all of the things with an eye for like, what's your net worth? What's the quantitative starting point? The second meeting out of the first five is we call script your plan, which is all about, okay, now that we know where we're at, from a balance sheet perspective, from a net worth perspective, where are we going? So like, what are the goals? Like, what's important to you? So this might, where you might say like, I want to take that trip to Paris. I want to maybe go down to part-time or 4 days a week. I want to retire in the next 5 years. I want to start volunteering. So it's kind of like a roadmap of where we want to go. So for us to be able to advise clients, we need to know where they're at, balance sheet, and where they want to go, balance sheet, and kind of like the goal stuff. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it's kind of a plan overview. So we're looking at cash positions, savings plan, debt management, student loans for a lot of our clients, making sure that we do have the balance sheet and the goals right. So we're kind of confirming that, planning for major purchases, that type of thing. The fourth meeting is typically what we call wealth building. So that's kind of the investments, retirement planning, making sure that we're moving accounts over for us to manage, allocating that in a way that's kind of in line with their risk profile, potentially looking at building retirement paychecks, that type of thing, Social Security stuff. And then the fifth one typically is wealth protection. And this is where we really get into things like life insurance, disability insurance are two of the heavy hitters. It could be health insurance, other things, property casualty insurance, but also the other protection is the estate plan. So in the absence of an estate plan, we're going to recommend that they do work with an attorney to get an estate plan in place, or it could be reviewing that and making sure that it's up to date, it's in line with what they need. They're not, exposed, in any way, and that, it's kind of, we're in line with their wishes. And then from there, the plan kind of goes into more of a plan review and implementation. So it's kind of the things that what drives that agenda is the things that the client wants to talk about, the things that we feel are maybe like the bleeding head wounds, like, hey, did you sign your will? Did you sign your estate documents yet? And make sure that those are in force. So the things that are, we view as kind of exposure or risks to the plan, and then kind of our regularly scheduled program. So, hey, it's been 2.5 years, Tim, since we actually did a formal beneficiary review. Let's get into the client portal, go through these accounts and make sure, you bought the CD. Where is that going to go? Or we added this Roth IRA. Can we check the primary and contingent beneficiaries and make sure that we're sprinkling those types of checks in as we go. It's been a while since we looked at the credit report. Let's look at that. So that's kind of our rhythm. That's kind of our cadence. So we want to make sure that throughout the course of our relationship with clients that, we're touching all parts of the financial plan, not just the parts that are exciting, like maybe investments. And, unfortunately, the estate plan kind of falls to the bottom of the barrel. So we want to make sure that we bring that up from time to time to one, make sure it's there, but then also it's current and in line with everything that the client wants.
It's a great overview. And I think that's valuable for our listeners to hear. I think sometimes when folks are looking at financial planning services, we throw that term out there generically, and that can and does look wildly different from one firm to another about what do they cover, what do they not cover, how often do they meet, as we've talked about before, variance and fees and charges and scope of services and fiduciary responsibilities or not. All of these things can be different. And to get a sneak peek into the first 5 and what to expect with the planning team, obviously estate planning as one part, but a lot of work to be done, getting that plan set up to begin with, as well as ongoing. And we feel strongly, Tim, whether someone's coming in the door, hey, I'm nearing retirement and I've got $3, $4, $5 million saved, or they're coming in the door with a net worth of negative $300,000 because of student loans and other liabilities, that it's important that we walk through methodically those steps, as we've seen that, in some cases, maybe they've done some of that work, but often, there's some opportunities to be able to shore that up and make sure, as you pointed out, before we develop the path forward of whatever that plan is, whether that be starting at the beginning of saving or withdrawing some of that as they go into retirement, we've got to have a good vision of where we're going, and we got to get organized before we can even do that. Great stuff, Tim. Dusting off the estate plan. Quick overview. As we mentioned, we'll link to some of the previous episodes that we've talked about this topic, one that we'll revisit occasionally as well. For folks that are looking to learn more about YFP planning, comprehensive financial planning services, you can go to yfpplanning.com. We'll also put a link in the show notes where you can book a free discovery call to learn more. Thanks so much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
Before we wrap up today's episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, I want to again thank our sponsor, the American Pharmacists Association. APHA is every pharmacist ally advocating on your behalf for better working conditions, fair PBM practices, and more opportunities for pharmacists to provide care. Make sure to join a bolder APHA to gain premier access to financial educational resources and to receive discounts on YFP products and services. You can join APHA at a 25% discount by visiting pharmacist.com/join and using the coupon code YFP. Again, that's pharmacist.com/join using the coupon code YFP. As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of Your Financial Pharmacist unless otherwise noted, and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.